Welcome to another episode of I Can Alteryx That with coaches Alex and John. I'm John. Today, we're going to cover Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 215. Gotta catch 'em all. Let's get started. Alright, so we've got a fun challenge for this week. This challenge, we've been given a set of all Pokemon that have ever been created, and we are tasked with creating an analytic app that allow us to choose Pokemon that belong to a specific region, one or more regions, a specific type, and then checkboxes to allow or disallow legendary Pokemon and regional Pokemon. And our goal is to determine how many Pokemon belong in the Ghost type, live in the Alola, Galar, Johto, or Kanto regions, where we allow legendary and regional variants. So, to get started, what I'm going to do is, well, first let's look at the data. We have a column for Pokemon. We have a column for their primary type, which is 100% okay, so every Pokemon has a primary type. Secondary type, you can see only about half of the Pokemon have a secondary type. Legendary is a binary field where it's null if the Pokemon is not legendary, and it says legendary if they are. A field called region that lists the region in which they live, and then another binary field called regional, which identifies if a Pokemon is a regional Pokemon or not. So the first thing that we should do is create this regions list box. So go to the interface tool palette and grab a list box tool. And you'll notice that the first thing we have to do is give it the text or question to be displayed, and that's this text up here in the upper left, where it says, pardon me, where it says regions. So we'll just name that regions. And then to populate the values of a list box, you go to the list values right here. And in this dropdown, you have all these choices. Unfortunately, there is no way to connect this text input to the list box and say, I want to take the values from the regions field to populate the list box. Of course, we could just do it manually. Alola, Galar, and so on. But I really dislike hard-coding values if I can at all avoid it. So there is a trick to dynamically populate a list box or a drop-down box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, first I'm just going to grab a record ID tool. This isn't 100% necessary, but I like to do this. So grab a record ID, then we're going to grab a select. And for the regions, I'm going to select only the record ID and the region field. So if I run this, you see that's all we have, but then I'm going to transform it via a crosstab tool. So what we need to do here, we're not going to group by anything. We're going to choose, for change column headers, we're going to take the field that we want the values from, so region. Then values, we're just going to select record ID and then pick any aggregation method. Does not matter at all. So you can see now when we run this, we have a data set where we have one column for every unique region, and the column name is that region's name. And then the values below don't matter whatsoever. And the reason that we're going to do this is because back in the list box, one of these values is called fields from a connected tool. So what that does is it populates the list box with the column headers from the connection. And we won't worry about what fields to show. You can see by default, fields from connected tool is selected, and now we can no longer change that. So if we were to run our app right now, you can see our regions list box is now populated with the regions. Going back to the list box, I can see that the regions are all selected by default, so we'll check this all checked by default. And now what I'm going to do is grab a filter tool, connect it to our original data, and we're going to write a custom filter. And this is going to read, region in, and then open parentheses, and I'm just going to type in manually the first region, Alola. It doesn't matter what region you put in there. Actually, it doesn't even matter what I put in there. But I'll put something that I would actually work, so if I ran this workflow for testing purposes, it would give us something that makes sense. So what I'm going to do now is, back to the interface, I'm going to grab an action tool, and bridge the gap between the list box and the filter with this action tool. And in here, the reason that I selected a custom is so I could use this in statement right here. An in statement allows me to make a comma separated list like that. So, and now I can go back up to the action tool, click on expression, and then replace specific string, and I'm going to delete everything other than the alola that's in single quotations. So there's one more thing that we have to do for this procedure to work, and that's back up on the list box. Instead of select tool mode, we're going to hit the generate custom list radio button, and then that's all we have to do. So now when I go ahead and run the app, you can see all of the regions selected. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more thing I need to do, and that is the interface designer. You can see right here, this tool right here, this browse that has our outputs. It's called Browse 58. So we'll go to the View, Interface Designer, go down to Properties by the gear icon, and make sure that on success we want to show the results from Browse 58. So now if we go ahead and run this, and select only the alola region and finish, you see that the dataset is filtered to only show those Pokemon from the alola region. So there you go, that's how we can create a dynamic filter and then update a multi-select list box with an analytic app. So the next step, we're going to create a drop-down for the type. And the first steps will be identical to what we did up here. I'm going to connect a select tool to the record ID, and this time I'm going to deselect everything other than primary type and record ID. Let's just get these out of the way. I'm going to grab another transform tool and connect that. We're going to do the exact same procedure here. Column headers is primary type. Values is record ID, and then select any aggregation method. Go to the interface, grab a drop-down, and connect that crosstab to this drop-down right here. From there, we'll name this type, just like we see in the picture up here. And you can see there's fewer options. We already have fields from connected tools, so that's all we have to worry about here. I'm going to create another filter. But actually, before I do that, there's one thing that's kind of bugging me. You can see here they just say type. But in our original data set, we have primary type and secondary type. And I'm assuming that, okay, you can see in our output, we want to find ghost types. Well, it's possible that a Pokemon could say have a grass type as their primary, but a ghost as the secondary. So what I want is a field that contains all Pokemon's types, regardless of if it's primary or secondary. So let's go ahead and transform our original data set using the transpose tool. And our key columns will be Pokemon, legendary, region, and regional. So everything other than our two types. And you can see when we run this, it's not going to mess up the region filter at all. But we now have name, where it says primary or secondary type, and value, where we actually have all of the types listed out, irrespective of if it's primary or secondary. So we'll grab a filter tool, and in here we can actually, because the drop-down is single select, this is a little easier. We can do a basic filter where value, and I'll just pick a type. I'll just do bug. Let's run this to get all that metadata flowing through. And just like before, I'm going to grab an action tool and bridge the filter and the drop-down tools. In this case, we're going to expand where it says simple, expand where it says operands, and then click on operand value equals bug. So this is saying change the operand value from bug to whatever is selected in the drop-down. And if I go ahead and run our analytic app now, you can see we'll select alola and bug, and if I run this, our data set, you can see here, shows all Pokemon that have a bug type and are in the alola region. Alright, so that's 2 steps down, 2 to go. Next, we have to worry about the legendaries. So for that, we will grab a checkbox tool. And this one's a little interesting. It's actually a simpler procedure, but in my opinion, it's a little trickier. So the name will be legendaries allowed. And you can see in the image it's not checked, so we will make sure the default value here is unselected. Back on the preparation, we're going to grab another filter. And I'm going to directly connect this checkbox to the filter from the magnifying input to the magnifying, or the magnifying output to the magnifying input. And here I'm going to write a custom filter. And if I expand this by hitting the starting bracket, you'll see we have a list of all of our field types or field names in blue, our engine constants in green, but then you see this interesting thing down here, number 1 highlighted in purple. What that number 1 represents is the value of this checkbox. So if it's checked, it's true. That number 1 is true. If it is unchecked, which is the default setting, then it's false. And if we go back and look at our data, we can see that legendary is null if the Pokemon's not legendary, and it says the word legendary if they are. So if we check this box, it says legendaries allowed, we want every single record from this field. If we uncheck it, then we only want the null records. We do not want these that say legendary. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and write our filter statement. So we're going to say if number 1, so this is saying if number 1 is true, so if it's true, legendaries are allowed, we want all records. What we can do is say then 1. Basically it's saying return everything, because 1 is Alteryx's way of saying true. This is saying then return everything. Else we'll say is null, legendary, end if. So going from the start, if number 1 is true, then 1, i.e. return everything. Otherwise, return only the records where legendary is null. And you can see that if we go ahead and run our app again, we'll do Alola, we'll do bug type, and we will not allow legendaries. And you can see when I run this, there will be no legendaries in there. And now if I run it again with that checked, hopefully there are some legendary types. Ah, perfect. And you can see right there we have 2 extra records. So now we're going to do that exact same thing for our final step, no regionals. So again, we'll grab interface, checkbox. We'll call this no regionals. Leave default value unchecked. We're going to grab another filter. The only difference here is the logic is backwards from what we just did. Connect the 2 tools, custom filter, and we're going to say if number 1, and the reason it's backwards is because of the wording of this filter. It says no regionals. So when that is selected, we want everything that's not, or we want everything that's null. When it is unchecked, we want everything. So when that's true, we want is null regional. Oh, I forgot the then, else 1, end if. So you can see it's the exact same idea, just the logic is reversed. So one more thing, let's go ahead and run this so that metadata goes through. We still have our primary and secondary type in one column. So let's go ahead and use a crosstab tool and reshape the data back into its original configuration. So we will group by Pokemon, legendary, region, and regional. Our column headers will be name. The values will be value. And I'll just select first. It doesn't matter what aggregation we choose here. And finally, I'm going to grab a select tool and make sure that everything is in the exact same position. Let's run this. So I'm going to put primary type up top, secondary type up here, and let's rename them to get rid of those underscores. Run this again. So now everything should be ready. You can see our data set is formatted in the exact same way as the output. So let's go ahead and run this. We want ghost types from the Alola, Galar, Johto, and Kanto regions. we want to allow legendaries, and we also want to allow regionals, meaning we're going to deselect no regionals there. And if I run this, hopefully we have 22 records. Ah, perfect. There we go. And just like that, we have created an analytic app using listbox, a drop-down box, both of them with dynamic values, and then 2 checkboxes using pretty interesting logic to allow or disallow legendaries and regionals. Well, anyway, that's my solution to this weekly challenge. Thanks for watching. As always, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Data Coach channel for more awesome lessons on Alteryx and all things data analytics and visualization. Follow Data Coach on Twitter at AskTessellation and follow me personally at jemory_dataviz. Thanks again.